Thank you, Chris. Once again this evening we have assembled our team of reporters who've been looking into those who might have been responsible for the coordinated terrorist attacks. In Washington, I'm joined by ABC's Justice Department correspondent, Pierre Thomas. And in New York, ABC's Brian Ross and John Miller. Gentlemen, I know you've all had a long day, and we want to be able to get you out of here again. But let's just quickly begin with the headlines. Brian, I've got you up at the moment. Why don't you tell me what the news of the hour is?
Well, after 3 days of this intensive investigation, the FBI today released a list of 19 hijackers. They say with certainty these were the men on board the suicide terrorist. They were able to identify which hijackers were on which plane, in some cases which seats they sat in, where they came from, and they identified at least 7 of them as pilots. Many had lived in this country legally, many in South Florida for several years, and others had arrived only in the last couple of weeks. ABC News consultants and federal authorities say a number of the men are known as associates of Osama bin Laden's, trained at his camps in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden's camps in Afghanistan, and this is part of a campaign or an effort by authorities to provide a crucial link between the terrorist attacks and bin Laden.
John Miller, you actually did, I guess it was the first American interview with Osama bin Laden. Can we see John there for a moment?
Yep, we're almost all set here.
All right, I'll tell you what, John is not in place for the moment, so let me go to Pierre Thomas and find out what it is. Pierre, I'm reminded of the fact that the Justice Department has assigned 4,000 FBI agents. As I hear that recitation of what is being found from Brian Ross, I sort of have the feeling that they have established a pattern now, but that a great deal new has not been learned over the last day. Is that true?
Well, Peter, actually, the investigation
No, I'm
unfolding.
Ted. You did that yesterday. I love Peter, but I'm Ted. Go for it.
Sorry about Ted. The investigation is unfolding at a nice pace, but there are not a number of daunting things that they face. Number one, they're looking for these 100 people who may have information about the attack. That's going to take some time. One source described that many of these people involved with this case are masters of diversion, many false IDs, so that will take considerable time. But they are finding that there's footprints of Osama bin Laden at different places in connection with the case. In fact, one of the people they detained yesterday is a person who had links to a relative of Osama bin Laden, and that is one of the reasons why they are holding that person as a material witness in this investigation, Ted.
Are they now absolutely? I think one of you, and I forget which of it was, you can jump in if it was not you, Pierre, one of you was citing sort of a level of confidence, degree of confidence that the FBI had beginning on the first day and then rising a little bit on the second and third days. What is the level of confidence that Osama bin Laden is in fact the man behind all of this? And is John Miller there now? John, can you hear me? Do we not have John Miller?
We have me. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can, John.
All right, we're all connected now.
There we go. My question is, are we focusing so much attention now on this association with Osama bin Laden that we are deluding ourselves into believing that if we can just find this guy, take him out, maybe even take out 2 or 3 of his top advisors, that is somehow going to resolve the problem?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Osama bin Laden has a military chain of command. He's got a military operations chief, Mohammed Atif. He's got a strategist and a propaganda fella named Zawahiri. And then, of course, he has, lieutenants and captains and soldiers. So if Osama bin Laden himself was taken out, would the al-Qaeda organization cease to exist? Probably not. I think what they're looking towards, though, is if Osama bin Laden is removed, what happens to his money? One of the things that makes Osama bin Laden such a powerful force in terrorism, according to U.S. government officials, is he's one of the few people who's able to pull off terrorism on the kind of level that can only be state-sponsored, but without being a state, because he has the resources. And it's not clear to any of the people I've spoken to that if Osama bin Laden is removed from the equation, that anybody else will have access to that level of money on a continuing basis. And then there's the simple equation of leadership and charisma. Osama bin Laden has a following unlike almost any other terrorist leader who we can remember in the last 15 or 20 years, because he does have that leadership quality, that charisma that makes people want to follow him. It's not apparent in the people beneath him.
When you talk about the people who follow him, what strikes me is that it is not a single nationality. We're not just talking about a group of Afghans. We're talking about Afghans, Egyptians, Palestinians, Algerians, Sudanese.
Somalis.
Somalis, exactly. They seem to cross all kinds of national barriers. And I'd also like you just to talk for a few seconds, John, about the issue of clearly there were sleepers from his organization in this country, probably still are. That is, agents who have been in place for a long time. And I think the assumption has to be that there are plenty of them in other countries around the world, don't you?
Ted, this is so much more than we're aware in the general sense. With Chris Isham from the ABC News Investigative Unit, I was able to travel a few months ago and debrief someone who was involved in Osama bin Laden's organization, who had access to his training schools, and he explained to us in great detail, and this was all vetted later, how the organization works. They recruit students to come for this 6 months training school where they learn surveillance techniques, counter-surveillance techniques, how to pick targets, how to assess targets, to draw diagrams and maps to avoid police detection, how to make and handle explosives, how to handle weapons. And when they complete their training, they're simply told to go back to their countries with their friends and to remain there and either wait for instructions or, on the other hand, come up with a plan that they can present to the organization for essentially for funding and logistical support and go ahead with it. And when we interviewed this fellow, we said, well, where are they from? And he didn't say, oh, well, they're from Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Afghanistan. He said in the classes that he saw, there were people from England and France and Italy and Canada. And he made a point saying that bin Laden always took time out to meet privately with the Canadian students because it was the closest jumping off point to America.
When you talk about Canadians and Germans and Americans and Brits, are we talking about people who are by definition fundamentalist Muslims, or is there some other thread that connects these people?
No, we're talking about nationals from all of the countries we just mentioned, meaning Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Somalia, who are living in those countries around the world in different ethnic communities, but who have come to Afghanistan for the training and are encouraged to go back where they came from and to wait.
I do want to ask you one more quick question, and I'd like to warn Brian Ross and Pierre Thomas that I'm going to come back to you just for whatever you think it is that we need to know at this hour that we haven't gotten to yet. But John Miller, first of all, I want to ask you, I know you and I had a conversation a couple of years ago in which it was quite clear that the U.S. government, knowing that Osama bin Laden comes from a very wealthy Saudi family, that they were going to use their connections with the international banking community to shut that spigot off. Clearly, they haven't been able to do it. Why?
And they did. They launched all kinds of highly sophisticated technical operations to try and cut him off from wire transfers and accounts that were double-blind accounts and so on. But what they've come to learn in the intervening time is Osama bin Laden can send word out to wealthy businessmen on the Arabian Peninsula who are like-minded and sympathetic and raise great amounts of cash very rapidly. And I think they were somewhat surprised at that they can cut him off from some of his conventional sources of funding, and he can go right around that and get funding from others.
Brian Ross, what do we need to know that we haven't talked about yet?
Where's the money? Where did it come from? These hijackers were free spending. They paid in cash $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for some of their flight lessons. They had credit cards. How did they pay those credit cards? Where are their bank accounts? Where did the money, the bank accounts come from? I think there's a lot of that going on right now, Ted, that would provide the kind of conclusive evidence generally needed in a court of law.
Pierre, what, either from your beat at the Justice Department or from whatever you may have learned from other sources, what do we need to know that you still have to tell us?
Well, Ted, I think one of the main things we need to know is that I spoke with a former FBI official today, and he said there's a huge gap in the law enforcement knowledge. And one of the things that struck him as he's talked to some of his former colleagues at the FBI is that they know that there was a great gap between what they thought the terrorist capability in the United States was and what it actually is. And in fact, when the FBI went on the Hill this week to brief some of the senators point blankly asked why and how could this happen. We thought their capability was somewhat limited in the United States, and it's much larger. And the FBI right now is trying to get a better sense of how wide this network was, how it was able to come together. And one source said this today, Ted. He said, think about when was the last time there was a hijacking in the United States. He said it was more than 10 years, and he said the notion that they could pull off 4 hijackings all within the span of 1 hour is extraordinary.
I must say, though, Pierre, what I find in some respects even more interesting is the notion that they've still got this deep pocket supply of money. Does the FBI have any sense of where that's coming from? And the only reason I suggest that's so interesting is because the U.S. government's been trying to shut it off.
Well, they would like to try to find that out. I don't get the sense from the sources I'm talking to that they know where that money is. The Treasury Department today announced a new program in which they're going to seek to neutralize, define, and attack terrorist assets. The program started about 2 weeks ago. Guess what the first priority will be now? Osama bin Laden.
You bet.